Hello everyone, I'm Cassandra. I'm a homeschool advocate for Logic of English, as well as a homeschool mom of 3 young kids. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the Language Arts curriculum, the Logic of English Foundations Level D. Today's video is a walkthrough of the Foundations D material, as well as I'm going to be sharing a sample Foundations D lesson so you can get a really good feel for the program. I'm going to also be sharing what's different in Foundations Level D that wasn't included with part of Foundations A, B, or C. For Foundations Level D, we're talking about students that are most likely in first grade, they might even be up to second grade going through this material. You would need to make sure that your student has gone through Foundations Level B as well as Foundations Level C before starting this level. You cannot jump right into Foundations Level D because the material covered assumes that you know the phonograms and the spelling rules and all the foundational information included in B and C you really need for your student to know before jumping in to Foundations Level D. New in the Foundations D set is the spelling rules flashcards. Now you would have already started teaching your child many of these spelling rules, part of Foundations Level B as well as Level C, but during the Foundations Level D, you are working more on the spelling rules, adding more spelling rules to the ones your student has already learned, and memorizing these spelling rules. So you're going to be actually going through the flashcards regularly, reviewing the spelling rules and making sure your child fully understands their spelling rules. The next new thing in Foundations D is the introduction of a few advanced phonograms and some grammar rules. There are 8 advanced phonograms and 8 grammar rules taught in Level D. You'll be introducing these throughout the lessons using the information and the rules included within the teacher manual. The 8 advanced phonograms are used in a few commonly used words your child might see in early children's books, while the 8 grammar rules provide an early grammar introduction. Grammar rules include things such as the 5 parts of a sentence, what are nouns, or what are verbs. Since only 8 of the advanced phonograms and 8 grammar cards are introduced in Level D, and that the cards come included in the Essentials 1 through 7 sets, these cards are not part of the Foundations D set. The cards are available as an optional purchase through the Logic of English store page if you would prefer to have the cards on hand while teaching Foundations Level D. Your child will go deeper into the advanced phonograms and the grammar rules when moving to the Essentials program. When reviewing those advanced phonograms, I did want to note that there is not a book, a colorful picture book like you saw with the Doodling Dragons, the Whistling Whales, the Knitting Knights for Foundations Level D. That being said, you can pull out those books that you originally went through because during Foundations D, you're still spending time going back through all those basic phonogram flashcards, reinforcing those, making sure the student does not forget any of those basic phonogram flashcards. So those picture books are great ways to practice and reinforce those phonograms, but there's not a separate picture book that you'll get as part of the Foundations D set. Foundations Level D includes the small readers that you've been using through the Foundations B and C program, but obviously specific for Foundations Level D. What is new with the Foundations D level, which our family really loved, is the connection of the reader, that's the Logic of English reader, with a reader that you may have seen, maybe it's in the library or you have on your bookshelf. So for this one, say Frog and Toad, and this one being the reader through the Logic of English reader is Frog or Toad. So this is a reader that is a non-fiction book about frogs and toads, and it goes through the differences between identifying frogs versus toads. And after your child would go through this book, they then get to read the fiction book, Frog and Toad. And I loved how this was connected through the Foundations D level, so you were able to read that nonfiction book and then read the fiction book, and they tie right together. So you'll see that even for these other examples that I have, you would have mouse and mole that would go through the characteristics of mice and moles, and then you have your fiction reader, upstairs mouse and downstairs mole, and so those would tie together in one of the groupings of the lessons. And then here's another example being bears, bears, and more bears, so your nonfiction about bears, as well as then your fiction book, Little Bear. So we loved going through these, being able to really learn about the real animal and then spending some time reading a fun fiction book. Before starting, make sure you have all the Foundations D literature books, as well as the Logic of English small readers. Many of the literature books are familiar children's titles that you may have already on your bookshelf at home. The literature books are available as a set on the Logic of English website store page. It is important to have both sets of books because the very first lesson in Foundations D uses the literature book Polar Opposites by Eric Brooks. In the next lesson, you will use the Logic of English small reader, the Arctic and the Antarctic Polar Opposites. So make sure you have all the books on hand before you start using the correct books throughout the lessons. Another new thing that you're going to see within Foundations Level D relates to spelling. So for Foundations A, B, and C, there were 5 spelling words for each lesson. So that would be 3 spelling words that they want the student to spell and 2 that are the bonus spelling words. When you move into Foundations Level D, that gets bumped up to 8 spelling words. So there's going to be 6 spelling words they want the child to spell and 2 are the bonus ones. So just look for some additional spelling and more words added to the spelling list within Foundations Level D. Additionally, in Foundations Level D, you are going to see a little bit of a change when it comes to the assessments. So you've been using the assessments while reviewing the information through Foundations A, B, and C with your child. Into Foundations D, the assessments look a lot different. They're almost positioned a little bit like a test, and obviously it's up to you as a parent whether you want to introduce testing yet. For my family, I actually like to add a little bit of a testing feel when we're going through this, just to get my child, to the point that they're realizing that they do need to practice their spelling words. They really do need to make sure they're understanding the information getting presented. And so I will position it more as a test, but that's up to you as what you want to do for your home. But you can see going through the assessment is a little bit fuller with the questions they're asking, as well as going through the actual reading portion of the assessments. So you're going to have your child read a story out loud to you while you are timing them. And if they end up making some mistakes through it, you're just sort of making a note off to the side of what mistakes, words they skipped, words they messed up, just to sort of take off for with their total time going through the story. And then right in the assessment, it gives you in the teacher manual a guide for being able to determine what grade level your child is reading at. And that was really helpful for me to see where is my child falling for in their reading, what level are they reading at based on how quickly they go through it, how much they comprehend and the comprehension questions, as well as are they making any mistakes while reading. The other portion of the assessments is related to spelling. And so every lesson you go through, every lesson I pull out 2 spelling words from the list that they had just worked on from that lesson, and you start building a spelling list so that by the time they hit that review day, I will actually give them a list of 10 spelling words that will be part of their spelling test. For my children, again, I like to sort of add that part of testing in, and that's completely up to you, but we'll actually practice those 10 spelling words, say in the evening or on a weekend of just getting ready, like, hey, you have a spelling test tomorrow, we're going to practice these spelling words, and then I will present it as an actual test for them. So do whatever works for your family, but there is definitely a change with the assessments throughout Foundations Level D. So let's go ahead and jump right into one of the lessons within D so you can get a really good feel for the flow of the program. For my family, I would typically take one of these D lessons and we will break it up over 3 days. Now, if you have an older child who's going through this and they're able to get it done in 2 days, that's fine. For my family, 3 days worked the best, but I will, as I walk through this, sort of show you where I would break for the day, and hopefully that gives you a good idea when you're walking through the program with your kids. So starting at the beginning, you can see the objectives for the lesson, what they're going to be reading, the spelling rules, grammar, vocabulary, spelling comprehension, and writing as well. So you can see everything that they're going through in the objectives. There is the list of materials that you'll need prior to teaching the lesson. I like to gather those ahead of time, whether it's the night before or right before teaching, just so I'm not scrambling when I'm in the middle of teaching. It's just nice to have those on hand. The very first section of lesson 153 is a phonogram practice, and you're going to be using your game cards. Now, these game cards you would have received with your Foundations A or B sets. If you would have ordered cursive, you would have received a cursive deck of cards with a book-faced set of cards as well. And if you would have ordered manuscript, you would have received the manuscript set of cards along with the book-faced set of cards. And so these types of game cards are used through all of the levels of Foundations, and they're used in the lesson today. The game we're playing is called Stack It, and you start by dealing 10 cards to your student, 10 cards to yourself. And what is really great about this game, and my kid really enjoyed it, is you're making a chain of cards. So we know that for our multi-letter phonograms, many of them say multiple sounds and many of them say the same sound. So what you're going to do is, say for, if I would have this card, my single O, my single letter phonogram O, it says ah, O, oo. So if I laid this card down for my ah, O, oo, then if I would say flip over, or in my deck of cards that I'm holding, if I have my oo, O card, I can say that the O, the long O from my ah, O, oo, matches my long O from my oo, O. And those are how those two are then connected. And then you would continue playing it. Let's say I would have my O, my OA, so O, I can connect that as well. And you're going to be making a long chain of cards based on the phonogram sounds and matching those. And my kid really loved this game. We just kept playing it afterwards during different lessons of practice, and it's a really great practice to really think through the multiple sounds that the multi-letter phonograms make. During Foundations Level D, you are going to spend a lot of time working on adding suffixes and prefixes. The next part of the lesson is working on the spelling rule about how to add a suffix. And so there is a spelling array in the student workbook. And so the student is going to see how many words they can form in the array by first selecting a word in blue on the left and then adding a suffix to the end of the word. And they are going to go down through the page and handwrite, writing out the words, saying things like, say it's clipping or topped or cooler. So they're going to be adding those words and making new ones as they go down through the page. While going through this lesson, it is recommended that you pull out the how to add a suffix chart. This chart was very handy when going through many of the lessons throughout the Foundations D level. You are spending a decent amount of time working with your student with the rule of when you are doubling the last consonant, when adding a vowel suffix to words ending with one vowel followed by one consonant, only if the syllable before the suffix is stressed. So that rule you're actually working with your child a lot in these lessons. And that would be one of the rules that you're focusing on, as well as using that chart and helping your child step through that chart while they're working on their spelling array. The next part of lesson 153 is to jump into some vocabulary. In this lesson, you are spending some time talking about contractions. You're helping your child identify when two words are brought together. How does that look? What is the meaning of the word? And walking through contractions with your student. There is an additional activity that you can do with your student by using some index cards, writing individual words and having them locate and find them in the room, and then putting those back together to be able to make a contraction. So that's a great additional activity that you can do during this section. There also is a worksheet page within the student workbook for contractions. So you would go through the activity sheet with them, have them read the individual words, as well as then making those connections for the contractions. The next section is grammar, and there is a worksheet that ties right to the grammar activity that you're doing. It's for subject and verb agreements. So your child would cut out your subject, the kittens, the goat, the dolphins. They would also cut out the verbs, and they're going to be making the connection between the correct subject and the correct verb and how that is written. And so going through this with them, they can obviously put that together correctly, and then when you're done, they can be silly and put some funny combos together. Maybe it's the goat plays with yarn, versus the kittens, and they can just mix things up, which is really silly and fun for your student. After finishing this grammar section within lesson 153, that's where I would cut my lesson and stop for the day. That's just a lot for, say, your first grader, or maybe it's your second grader going through the material. Now, if you have an older child that's going through this and maybe they're comfortable continuing on, of course, go ahead and continue at the pace the student is on. But this right there is a great stopping point for in my home, and so that we would start the next day right with spelling. So starting with day 2 for lesson 153, you're going to be beginning with the spelling section. And so you're going to be stepping through the same process that you would have went through with the other levels with the spelling analysis and finger spelling. So for this list, there are 6 words they want the student to definitely do, and 2 are the bonus words. And as you go through this spelling list, you also then want to select 2 of the words that you're going to put on a separate list that will then be used as part of your assessment and review every 5 lessons. So starting for today, the words on the list are arrive, stare, breathe, believe, excitement, angry, worth, and ocean. So those would be the words that your child would be using as part of the spelling analysis. So just starting with the word arrive, I would read to my child, I would say, please arrive 5 minutes early. And so I'd ask them to first, I would actually ask them to hum the word, and they would hum the word, go, So then they would know that there are 2 syllables in the word. I find it easier for my child to be able to write 1 syllable at a time. So I would say, okay, well, let's sound out the first syllable. And they would say, R. And so I'd hold up my 2 fingers, R. And so they would know that they need to write AR, which is the 2-letter phonogram R. So after they write AR on their paper, I then would say to them, let's sound out that second syllable. And they go, I, and then the silent final E, and they would write that on the paper. Afterwards, I would ask my child to do any markings that they know they need to mark on their paper. So this would be underlining the AR phonogram so they can identify that's a multi-letter phonogram. They would also put a line over that I for a long I sound. They would underline the V, and that's to identify that the English word can't end with the letter V, because English words do not end in I, U, V, or J. And then they would also then put 2 lines under that silent final E to identify that is a silent final E. So I would have my child do all their markings for that word, and after they're done, I would ask this child to then sound out the word for me while I go up to my board and I actually write it. So they would sound out R, write R, then they would sound rive, I've, and I would write it for them, and then they would verify that I spelled arrive correctly. And so you would do that process going through all the spelling words, all 8 of them, with your child. After going through the spelling section with your child, it goes into reading, and you're going to be reading today from the Dogsworth in New York book. They do have some optional activities that you can go through with spending some time finding New York on a map and finding New York City, as well as watching maybe some videos or getting some books at the library regarding New York City and some of the sites and places people would visit when going to New York. So after going through that, we then spent the time to read the section for the lesson, which is Dogsworth in New York, the chapter 2 called The Train. And there is some questions they have you ask your child before they start reading, as well as when finished, you are going to be asking them the comprehension questions, really making sure that they aren't just reading the text, that they are reading it and fully comprehending the information in the book. After going through the Dogsworth in New York book, that's where I would cut my lesson for the day. You've just gone through a lot of spelling and handwriting all those spelling words, and then going through the reader, as well as maybe spending some time watching a video or looking up books on New York. And so after going through that, that's where I would cut it for the day, so then I can begin the day number 3, starting with some writing. As we saw with Foundations Level C, Foundations Level D includes copywriting as well as dictation. So for this particular lesson, they're going through dictation. So this would be that I would say a sentence to my student, I would say it again to them, and then have them say the sentence back to me. I can review some of the grammar rules that we've already gone through, such as that a sentence must begin with a capital letter and must have an end mark. So I would review those grammar rules before we get started. And then I would give the student the sentence, the Statue of Liberty is in New York City. So I would just give my student a single piece of paper and have them just handwrite, whether it's in manuscript or cursive, whatever style they've been taught, they would write that sentence out. And if they need some help with finger spelling, I will assist when needed. You do want to get to the point that your child's starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, maybe sounding out those words on their own and writing those words, but definitely jump in if they're struggling and they just need some help with how to actually give them some finger spelling of the words when they are writing. When they get finished going through that writing activity, the last part of the lesson is a spelling activity. And you'll see this throughout the Foundation D lessons, that there will be one part that is just learning their new spelling words and going through the spelling analysis. And then there'll be a fun spelling activity that they'll do towards the end of the lesson, so that it'll reinforce and help them practice those spelling words that they just worked through in one of the previous days. So for this activity, this is Q-tip spelling. My kids really like this one. So they would use just a a Q-tip and some paint and a paper, and they're going to go ahead and practice writing their spelling words but using a Q-tip, and it's really fun. And right there, that's the end then of lesson 153. If you are just simply wanting to learn more about Logic of English or just about the program, go to the Logic of English website. I hope this video helped you just see what's included within the Foundations D level as well as that sample lesson, and I just want to thank you for watching this video.